For 10 years, I let my father believe I was exactly what he called me: uneducated, directionless, and utterly worthless. It was safer to be his disappointment than his target, but when he tried to rewrite my mother's legacy to cover his own fraud, I realized silence was no longer a shield. He thought he was inviting a failure to his gala, but he was actually welcoming the whistleblower who already knew where the money went. My apartment in Chicago was quiet, clean, and exactly 200 miles away from the life I had escaped. To the few friends I had here, and to the colleagues at the compliance firm where I worked as a senior analyst, I was simply Anna, just Anna, a woman who was 33 years old, diligent with details, and guarded about her past. They knew I had a degree from a good university. Though I never framed the diploma, they knew I made a comfortable salary, though I drove a sedan that was 5 years old and wore clothes that whispered rather than shouted. They did not know that in my hometown of Oakhaven, I was a cautionary tale. To my father, Graham Bell. I was the disappointing remnant of a first marriage that had ended in a slow, tragic fade. I was the daughter who had, in his words, failed to launch. I had spent 10 years curating this failure. It was a masterpiece of deception. I let him believe I was scraping by on hourly wages, drifting between aimless administrative temp jobs, and living in a cramped studio apartment. I let him believe this because incompetence was the only armor that worked against him. If Graham Bell thought you were capable, he used you. If he thought you were successful, he took credit for it. But if he thought you were broken, he ignored you, and being ignored was the only freedom I had ever known. Then the phone rang on a Tuesday evening. I looked at the screen. The name Graham Bell did not appear. I had never saved his number, yet I knew the digits by heart. I let it ring twice, composing my face, slowing my breathing, slipping into the character of the flustered, inadequate daughter. "Hello?" I answered, pitching my voice slightly higher, adding a tremor of hesitation. "Anna." His voice was a baritone wall, smooth and impenetrable. It was not a greeting, it was an announcement of his presence. "We need you home this weekend." He did not ask if I was busy. He did not ask if I was well. In Graham's world, my time had no value, so he could spend it however he chose. "This weekend?" I asked. I have a shift scheduled at the center." "Cancel it," he said. He sounded bored, as if explaining gravity to a toddler. "It is the foundation gala on Saturday. The board is honoring my 20 years of community leadership. It is a significant night for the family. We need a united front." He paused, and I could hear the rustle of papers on his end. He was likely signing checks or reviewing contracts while speaking to me. "Besides," he added, his tone shifting to that performative benevolence that always made my stomach turn, "I have some paperwork regarding your mother's estate. Just loose ends. We need to tidy it up so I can move forward with the new trust structure. It will be easier if you are here to sign it in person. I will cover your gas money." Of course. The mention of my mother made my hand tighten around the phone. She had been dead for 6 years, yet he still spoke of her estate as something inconvenient, a mess she had left him to clean up. I really cannot afford to lose the hours. "Dad, I lied." "Anna." The benevolence vanished, replaced by a cold, sharp edge. "Do not be difficult. It is one weekend. Lenora has already arranged the guest room. Be here by Friday dinner. 6 o'clock. Do not be late." The line went dead. I lowered the phone. My hand was shaking, not from fear, but from a sudden, violent surge of adrenaline. He wanted to tidy up my mother's estate. For 6 years, he had told me there was nothing left, that medical bills had swallowed her assets, that her small inheritance had evaporated. Now, suddenly, there were loose ends? I walked to my desk, unlocked the bottom drawer, and pulled out my real laptop, the one with the encrypted drive where I kept my work files. I was not the driftless girl he thought I was. I was a forensic analyst who specialized in tracing illicit financial flows for nonprofits. I spent my days hunting people who used charity as a mask for greed. I looked at the black screen of my computer. Then I packed a bag. I packed the cheap, worn-out clothes I kept specifically for visits home. I left my jewelry in the safe. I took the bus to the rental lot where I kept a beat-up compact car solely for these trips, swapping my reliable sedan for the prop vehicle. If Graham Bell wanted his failure of a daughter to come home, she would come home, but she was bringing eyes that saw everything. The drive to Oakhaven took 3 hours, and with every mile, I felt the air grow heavier. The landscape shifted from the industrial gray of the city to the manicured green of the suburbs, and finally, to the sprawling estates of the valley where the Bell family had planted its flag 2 generations ago. The house was a sprawling colonial revival, white columns and black shutters, sitting atop a hill that looked down on the rest of the town. It was beautiful in the way a predator is beautiful, sleek, imposing, and devoid of warmth. I pulled my car into the circular driveway, parking far to the side so as not to mar the aesthetic of Graham's silver luxury sedan and Lenora's convertible. I took a breath, checked my reflection in the rearview mirror to ensure I looked sufficiently tired and unkempt, and stepped out. The front door opened before I reached it. Graham stood there. He was 60 years old and looked 50, thanks to expensive dermatologists and a life where he rarely heard the word no. He wore a cashmere sweater and pressed trousers, holding a glass of scotch as if he were posing for a lifestyle magazine. "Anna," he said. He stepped out onto the porch. For a moment, a neighbor walking a dog passed by on the road below. Graham's face transformed instantly. The bored sneer vanished, replaced by a wide, radiant smile. He opened his arms. "There she is," he called out, loud enough for the neighbor to hear. "Made it home safe. Good girl." He embraced me. It was a performance. His arms were stiff, his chest hard and unyielding. He smelled of expensive cologne and old money. As the neighbor waved and continued walking, Graham pulled back. The smile dropped from his face like a curtain falling. "You are late," he said, his voice flat. "It is 5:50. I said, "You said 6. I said, "Be here by 6. That implies you are settled and ready, not dragging luggage up the steps." He turned his back on me and walked into the house. "Come inside. Lenora is dressing for dinner. Try to make yourself presentable." I dragged my bag into the foyer. The house smelled of lemon polish and lilies, a scent that I always associated with funerals. The floors shone with a mirror-like gloss. Miles came down the stairs a moment later. My half-brother was 28, 5 years younger than me, and possessed the golden retriever energy that Graham had never been able to beat out of him. Miles was the heir apparent, groomed to take over the Bell Foundation, but he wore the pressure like an ill-fitting suit. "Anna." He hurried down the last few steps and gave me a hug that actually felt real. "I did not know you were coming until this morning. Dad called on Tuesday," I said, managing a small, weak smile. "Right, of course." Miles pulled back, scanning my face. "You look tired. You okay?" "I am fine," I said. "Just working a lot. Doing what again? Data entry? Something like that." Miles nodded, his eyes sympathetic but distant. He loved me, I thought, but he pitied me more, to him. I was the sister who just couldn't get it together. He had no idea that the compliance frameworks he struggled to understand in his board reports were the same ones I wrote lectures on for industry conferences. "Dad is in a mood," Miles warned, lowering his voice. "The gala stress. He wants everything perfect. Just nod and smile, okay? Don't bait him." "I never bait him, Miles. I know. But just keep it smooth." "For me?" I nodded. "I will be a ghost." I went up to the guest room, the small one at the back of the house, not the one I had grown up in. Lenora had turned my childhood bedroom into a gift-wrapping center years ago. I washed my face, put on a gray cardigan that was slightly too large, and went down to dinner. The dining room was a theater of intimidation. The table was mahogany, long enough to seat 12, but set only for 4 at one end. Graham sat at the head, Lenora at his right, Miles at his left. I took the seat across from Graham. The position of the accused, Lenora Bell, my stepmother, was a woman composed entirely of sharp angles and passive aggression. She was beautiful, icy, and 10 years younger than Graham. She looked up from her salad as I sat down. "Anna," she said. Her voice was light, airy. "We were not sure you would make it. Graham said your car was making a terrible noise when you pulled in." "It is fine," I said, unfolding my napkin. "It just needs a new belt, I am sure," she said, smiling with her teeth but not her eyes. "It is so quaint how you hold on to things. I suppose when you have such a small life, you have to be careful with expenses." I saw Miles wince and look down at his plate. "It is not about the money," I said softly. "It still runs." Graham cut into his steak. The knife scraped against the china, a harsh sound that silenced the table. "Let us not pretend. Anna," he said without looking up, "it is entirely about the money. If you had listened to me 10 years ago and taken the position I arranged at the bank, you would be driving a car that did not sound like a dying animal. But you wanted to find your own way." He took a bite, chewed slowly, and swallowed. "And here we are," he continued. "You are 33, no husband, no assets, a job that a high school dropout could perform. It is not a criticism, Anna, it is just an objective fact. You are uneducated in the ways of the world, and you have made yourself worthless to the marketplace." I kept my eyes on my water glass. The anger was a cold, hard knot in my chest, but I did not let it reach my face. This was the script. I knew my lines. "I am happy enough." "Dad," I mumbled. "Happy," he scoffed. "Happiness is a consolation prize for people who cannot achieve greatness." "Graham," Lenora said, placing a hand on his forearm, softly. "Not at the table. We should be grateful she came. It is nice that we can still include her in these things. It shows people that we care for everyone, even the broken branches." Miles cleared his throat loudly. "So, the gala," he said, desperate to change the subject. "The RSVP list is over 400. The mayor is sitting at our table." Graham's attention shifted, though the contempt lingered in the air like cigar smoke. "Yes, the mayor knows where his bread is buttered. The redevelopment project downtown hinges on the foundation's support. If he wants that grant money for the arts district, he needs to kiss the ring on Saturday." I listened. I did not look up. But I listened. The redevelopment project, the arts district, these were public initiatives, theoretically funded by city taxes. But Graham spoke of them as if he owned them. "We are finally going to clean up that Riverside district," Graham said, taking a sip of wine. "Push out the blight. Bring in the right kind of commerce. The foundation is putting up the seed money, but the city is matching it 3-1. "And who is the contractor?" Miles asked. "Is it still obscure?" Graham waved a hand. "A consortium. It is all handled. Do not bore us with logistics. Miles, focus on the image. You need to charm the donors on Saturday. They need to see that the legacy is safe in your hands." He looked at me then, his eyes narrowing. "And you, Anna, you will wear something appropriate. Lenora has picked out a dress. Do not argue. I will not have you showing up in something from a thrift store. I will wear whatever you want." I said, "Good." Graham wiped his mouth and tossed his napkin onto the table. "Now, before dessert, the paperwork." He reached under his chair and produced a manila envelope. He slid it across the mahogany surface. It stopped inches from my hand. "What is this?" I asked, though I did not touch it yet. "Just administrative cleanup," Graham said. "Your mother had a lingering interest in a few long-term bonds and a dormant trust structure. It is negligible value, really, but it complicates the audit for the foundation. We need to dissolve it to simplify the books." I looked at the envelope. "Dissolve it. This authorizes the transfer of those residual rights to the foundation," he explained, checking his watch. "It is a donation, essentially. A final gift from your mother to the cause." I opened the envelope. The document was thick. Legal-sized paper. Dense with single-spaced text. Quitclaim deed. Waiver of beneficiary rights. Irrevocable transfer of assets. I scanned the first page. It looked standard. But my training screamed at me. The language was too broad. Any and all interests, known or unknown. "I need to read this." I said, Graham laughed. It was a short, barking sound. Read it? He repeated. Anna, do not be absurd. It is legalese. You would not understand half the words. I would still like to look it over. Maybe tonight? Graham stared at me. The amusement faded, replaced by irritation. I have the notary coming in 10 minutes, he said. It is a signature. Anna, it is not a peace treaty. Why do you always have to make things difficult? I am not being difficult, I said, keeping my voice trembling but stubborn. Mom always said I should read things before signing. Lenora sighed. A loud, theatrical exhalation. Oh, for heaven's sake. She is paranoid, Graham said, shaking his head. Just like her mother. Fine. Take it. Read it. Pretend you understand it. But have it signed by breakfast. I am not chasing you around all weekend. He stood up, signaling that dinner was over. He walked to the sideboard and poured himself another scotch. Then he raised the glass. A toast, he announced. We all froze. Miles half stood. Lenora smiled. I remained seated. To family, Graham said, his eyes fixing on me with a predatory glint. To Miles, who carries the weight of our future. To Lenora, who keeps this house perfectly. And to Anna. He paused, letting the silence stretch until it was uncomfortable. To Anna. He continued, who serves as a vital reminder to us all, a reminder that talent is not genetic, and that without ambition, a person is merely space. May we all strive to be more than just space. He drank. Lenora tittered softly. Miles looked at the floor, his face flushing red. I did not drink. I stared at my father, etching the moment into my memory. I let the humiliation wash over me, feeling the burn of it, fueling the cold engine in my chest. I am tired. I whispered, I am going to bed. I took the envelope and left the room. My room, the guest room, was cold. I locked the door and wedged a chair under the handle. It was an old habit from when I was 16, and it felt necessary again. I sat on the floor, away from the window, and turned on only the small bedside lamp. I opened the envelope. I spread the documents out on the rug. I took my phone out, my real phone, the one with the high-resolution camera and the secure encrypted messaging app. I began to photograph every page. Click, turn, click, turn. The document was structured to look boring. It front-loaded the standard boilerplate text, indemnification, severability, governing law, but buried in Schedule C, on page 14. I found it. It was a list of assets being consolidated. Most were labeled inactive or depleted, but one line caught my eye. Asset ID 44-902-B, designation, the Helena Bell Restricted Education Fund, custodian, G, Bell Foundation subsidiary, Northlake Holdings. I zoomed in on the photo. Restricted Education Fund. I froze. I had never received an education fund. When I was 18, Graham had told me there was no money for college. He said my mother had spent it all on her treatments. I had worked 2 jobs and taken out massive student loans to pay for my undergraduate degree. And then a fellowship had covered my master's. I was still paying off the interest on the undergrad loans. If there was a fund, and it was restricted, that meant the money could only be used for education. If it hadn't been used for me, where was it? And why was it being transferred to a subsidiary called Northlake Holdings? I moved to the next page. There was a clause about retroactive reclassification of expenditures. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. In the compliance world, retroactive reclassification was a polite way of saying we spent this money on the wrong thing, and now we want to change the label so it looks legal. I checked the timestamp on my phone. It was 9:30. I opened my encrypted messaging app and found Sloan Mercer. Sloan was an ethics attorney in D.C., a woman I had collaborated with on a whistleblower case 2 years ago. We trusted each other because we both knew where the bodies were buried in our respective industries. I typed a message. Hypothetical. Estate waiver asks beneficiary to release rights to a restricted education fund that the beneficiary never accessed. Document also lists a subsidiary holding the funds. Beneficiary is being pressured to sign to simplify audits. What does that smell like to you? I hit send. I waited. The house was silent below me. I could imagine Graham in his study, feeling powerful, thinking he had cowed me into submission. He thought I was upstairs crying over his toast. The phone buzzed. Sloan, smells like embezzlement, she wrote. If the fund was restricted, they couldn't legally move the principal without a qualifying event, tuition. If they spent it on something else, they've created a phantom debt on their books. They need the waiver to make the beneficiary forgive the misuse before the auditors see the discrepancy. Who is the beneficiary? I hesitated. I typed, a client. Tell the client not to sign. Sloan replied, and tell them to get the EIN number of that subsidiary. Restricted funds don't just vanish, they leave ghosts. I sat back against the bed frame. Ghosts. I looked around the room. This wasn't my room, but it held the overflow of my childhood. Boxes of old clothes Lenora deemed too sentimental to throw away, but too ugly to display, a stack of yearbooks. I crawled over to the closet and pulled out a dusty cardboard box labeled Anna, miscellaneous. I dug through it, old stuffed animals, a participation trophy from soccer, and at the bottom, a stack of my mother's things that Graham had shoved in here after she died. I found a blue spiral notebook. My mother had been a meticulous note-taker. She wrote down grocery lists, garden plans, erratic thoughts during her final months when the medication made her mind foggy. I opened it. Flipping through the pages, her handwriting was shaky toward the end. Doctor appointment Tuesday. Call Anna. Graham says the account is empty. I stopped. Graham says the account is empty. I flipped forward. 2 pages later, dated 3 weeks before she died, was a list of numbers. They looked like account numbers, and below them, written in a sudden, sharp clarity with heavy pressure on the pen, he is moving things again. I don't know where. If anything happens, don't let him rewrite me. I stared at the words. Don't let him rewrite me. My mother had known. She hadn't been unstable. She had been watching him, and he had gaslit her until the day she died. Just as he was trying to gaslight me now, he wasn't just hiding money. He was hiding the fact that he had stolen my future to fund his own ambition. The education fund wasn't just a line item. It was the tuition I never got, the struggle I lived through, the years I spent thinking I wasn't worth investing in. I closed the notebook and slipped it into my bag. Underneath the clothes, I picked up the legal document. Graham wanted a signature by breakfast. I stood up and walked to the mirror. The woman looking back at me was not the scared girl who had left this house 10 years ago. She was Anna Bell, senior analyst, fraud hunter. I would sign the document, but not the way he wanted. I would sign a version that gave me time, and while he was busy playing the benevolent king at his gala, I was going to burn his kingdom down from the inside. I unlocked the door, crept out into the hallway, and listened to the silence of the house. It was the silence of a vault. Tomorrow, I would start finding the keys. The sun rose over Oakhaven with a brightness that felt aggressive. I had slept for maybe 3 hours, my mind racing through the documents I had photographed. When I went downstairs, the house was already humming with the manic energy of gala preparation. Caterers were carrying crates through the side door, and a florist was arguing with Lenora in the foyer about the precise shade of hydrangeas. I slipped out the back door before anyone could assign me a task. I had a meeting that was not on the official schedule. I drove my battered rental car to the edge of town, to a neighborhood of small, neat bungalows that had not changed in 30 years. Dana Whitaker lived in the third one on the left. Dana had been my mother's best friend, a retired nurse who had been the only person outside our family to see the reality of my mother's final years. She opened the door before I knocked. She looked older, her hair fully gray now, but her eyes were sharp. "Anna," she said. She pulled me into a hug that smelled of coffee and lavender laundry detergent. It was the first honest physical contact I had felt since arriving in this town. "I am glad you came," she said, pulling back to look at me. "You look like her, around the eyes." I came inside. Her kitchen was cluttered and warm, a stark contrast to the sterile museum I had just left. We sat at a small round table. I found a notebook. Dana, I said, skipping the small talk. Mom's. She wrote that Graham was moving money, that he was rewriting her. Dana sighed, a long and heavy sound that seemed to carry years of kept secrets. She wrapped her hands around her mug. Your mother was not crazy. Anna, she was sick. Yes, the cancer took a lot from her. But her mind? That was sharp until the end. She started noticing things about 2 years before she passed. Graham would come home with documents for her to sign. He would say they were for tax purposes. Or to secure your future. My future, I repeated, the bitterness coating my tongue. He was obsessed with the foundation's image. Dana said, he started launching these massive capital campaigns, the Bell Family Education Initiative, the Helena Bell Arts Fund. He put her face on everything. He made her the saint of Oakhaven, I remember. I said, he loved the photo ops, but here's the thing. Dana leaned in, lowering her voice. Your mother was worried about the cash flow. She told me once that Graham was moving donations into accounts she did not control, but he was listing her as the primary trustee. She said he was using her name to bypass board oversight. Because who questions a dying woman's charitable wishes? I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room, using her as a shield. Did she ever try to stop him? I asked. She tried to ask questions, Dana said, and that was when he started telling people she was confused. He would tell the doctors she was paranoid. He would tell the neighbors the medication was making her aggressive. He isolated her. Anna. He made sure that if she ever tried to speak up, no one would believe her. I stared at the floral pattern on the tablecloth. It aligned perfectly with the narrative Graham was currently spinning about me. The unstable mother, the incompetent daughter. He is trying to get me to sign away my rights to her estate. I said, he says it is just cleanup. Dana reached across the table and gripped my hand. Her fingers were strong. Do not sign it, she said fiercely. Helena told me, right before the end, that she had hidden a file. She never told me where, but she said that if Graham ever tried to erase her, the file would prove who he really was. I squeezed her hand back. I think I'm starting to find the pieces. Dana. After leaving Dana, I did not go back to the house. I went to the public library. It was a grand old building with limestone columns, another monument to the town's wealthy patrons. I went to the local history archives in the basement. The librarian, a young man who looked bored, pointed me toward the microfiche machines and the physical stacks of local society magazines. I spent 2 hours pulling every gala brochure, every annual report, and every society column from the last 10 years. I laid them out on a long wooden table. The story they told was consistent, glowing, and completely fabricated. There was a brochure from 7 years ago. My mother had been bedridden then, unable to walk without assistance. Yet the text described her as the tireless architect of the Bell Community Outreach Program, claiming she had personally overseen the allocation of $50,000 to inner-city schools. I pulled the tax filings for that year from a public database on my laptop. The Bell Community Outreach Program had indeed received $50,000, but the money had been paid out to a consulting firm called Civic Solutions. I searched for Civic Solutions. The corporate registration led to a P.O. box in Delaware. I kept digging. I found a gala program from the year after she died. It featured a full-page tribute to Helena Bell, the heart of our mission. It announced the launch of the Helena Bell Scholarship for underprivileged youth. I stared at the page. The Helena Bell Restricted Education Fund, the asset I had seen in the legal documents the night before. According to the brochure, this fund had been active for 5 years. It should have been dispersing scholarships. I searched the local news archives for any mention of a student receiving a Helena Bell scholarship. There were 0 results. 5 years, a restricted fund, no recipients. The money was going somewhere, but it was not going to students. My phone buzzed. It was Graham. Where are you? We have a donor lunch at the club in 30 minutes. You need to be there. Do not embarrass me. I looked at the text. I felt a surge of nausea, but I swallowed it down. I needed to be in the room. I needed to see the people who were helping him spin this web. I packed up my papers. I was not going to embarrass him. I was going to study him. The country club was a place of soft carpets and hushed conversations. I arrived wearing the dress Lenora had laid out for me, a navy blue sheath that was tasteful but intentionally dull. It was the uniform of a woman who was not meant to shine. Graham was holding court in the grill room. He stood near the fireplace, surrounded by 3 men in expensive suits. When he saw me, his expression flickered with annoyance before smoothing into a mask of paternal indulgence. "And here she is," he announced, gesturing for me to join them. "My daughter, Anna. She's visiting from Chicago." I walked over, forcing a shy smile. "Hi, Dad," I said softly. "Gentlemen, this is Anna," Graham said, draping a heavy arm around my shoulders. "She is finding her footing in the city, working in administration. Is it? Data entry. Mostly," I said, sticking to the lie. "It pays the bills." Graham laughed, a sound that invited the other men to share in his benevolent tolerance of my mediocrity. "Honest work," one of the men said. He was thick-set, with a face that looked like it had been scrubbed raw. I recognized him from the photos in the library. This was Thomas Keller, the biggest construction contractor in the county. "Thomas is handling the Riverside redevelopment," Graham said, squeezing my shoulder hard enough to bruise. "A massive undertaking. The foundation is proud to be the anchor partner." "It is a big swing," Keller said, grinning. "But with your dad's backing, the city council basically waved us through. No red tape? No bidding process?" I asked. The question slipped out, quiet and innocent. The table went still for a fraction of a second. Graham's fingers dug into my arm. "It is a public-private partnership." "Anna," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "It operates differently than a standard contract. You would not understand the complexities." "Right," I said, looking down. "Sorry, I just read about bid requirements in the paper once," Keller laughed, but his eyes were cold. "Do not worry about it, honey. That is why we hire lawyers, to handle the boring stuff." A third man, thin and nervous-looking, cleared his throat. This was Elias Thorne, a major donor I recognized from the invite list. "Speaking of lawyers, Graham," Thorne said, his voice low, "I heard a rumor that the state attorney general's office is looking into regional nonprofits. Just a compliance sweep, they say." I felt Graham stiffen beside me. "It is an election year." "Elias," Graham said smoothly, "they always rattle sabers to look tough on regulation. Our books are immaculate. We have nothing to worry about." "Of course," Thorne said. But he did not look convinced. He looked like a man who was wondering if his name was on the wrong documents. Graham steered the conversation back to the gala, to the menu, to the grandeur of the evening. He kept me at his side like a prop, a mute witness to his power. I played my part. I nodded. I smiled. I looked at the floor. But my ears were wide open. No red tape. Attorney General. Compliance sweep. Graham was not just a bully. He was careless. He had been operating without oversight for so long that he thought he was untouchable. I escaped to the restroom halfway through the lunch. I locked myself in the farthest stall and pulled out my phone. I needed a sanity check. I called Calvin Reed. Calvin was a genius. He was a senior compliance officer at my firm in Chicago, a man who could look at a spreadsheet and see a crime scene. We had worked late nights together on high-stakes audits. He knew I was good, but he knew nothing about my family. "Hey, Reed here," he answered on the second ring. "Calvin, it is Anna," I said, keeping my voice to a whisper. "I need you to walk me through a hypothetical. I am listening." "Hypothetical scenario," I said. "A private foundation accepts restricted donations for an education fund. The fund is held by a subsidiary. 5 years pass. No scholarships are awarded, but the subsidiary shows active cash flow." Calvin let out a low whistle. "That is not a red flag. Anna, that is a siren. If the funds are restricted, they cannot be touched for anything else. If there is cash flow but no scholarships, they are either laundering money through the subsidiary or they are paying out to vendors for services that do not exist. Self-dealing." I said, "Classic." Calvin agreed. They are likely using the subsidiary to pay inflated contracts to companies owned by board members, or they are funneling it back to the donor to get a tax write-off on money they kept. Why do you ask? Working on a weekend? Just reading something interesting? I said, what if the subsidiary has a name that is almost identical to a legitimate vendor? Like, off by one letter? That is the oldest trick in the book. Calvin said, vendor spoofing confuses the auditors. Anna, if you are looking at actual papers that show this, you need to preserve them. That is criminal fraud. I closed my eyes. Criminal fraud? My father. Thanks. Calvin. I said, I will call you later. I hung up. My hands were shaking. I washed them with cold water, staring at my reflection. You are not the daughter. I told myself, you are the auditor. When we returned to the house, Miles was waiting in the driveway. He looked pale. Graham went inside to take a call. Leaving me alone with my brother, Miles kicked at the gravel with his dress shoe. Did he behave? Miles asked. He was himself. I said. Miles sighed. Look, Anna, about the redevelopment thing, what about it? I did not want to say anything in front of Dad. Miles said, his voice dropping, but I am worried. He is pushing me to sign off on the disbursement schedule for the project. I looked at the preliminary budget. The numbers for site preparation are huge, like 3 times the market rate. I looked at my brother. He was not corrupt. He was just terrified. Who is doing the site prep? I asked. A company called Northlake Logistics, Miles said. I froze. Northlake, the same name as the subsidiary holding the education fund. Miles, I said carefully, do you know who owns Northlake? He shook his head. It is a shell company. I think Dad says it is efficient to keep it in-house, but if I sign off on those checks and something is wrong, if you sign off, you are liable. I said, I know. Miles ran a hand through his hair. But if I refuse, he will destroy me. You know how he is. He will say I am weak. He will cut me out of the trust. I have a mortgage. Anna, I have a fiancé. He looked at me, his eyes pleading. I do not have your freedom. Anna, you got out. You have your little life in Chicago. You do not have anything to lose. I have everything to lose. I felt a surge of pity, followed by a sharp spike of anger. My little life. Even Miles believed the lie. Do not sign them yet. Miles, I said, just stall. Tell him you need a final review. Blame the lawyers. I cannot stall forever, he said. The gala is tomorrow. He wants to announce the project is fully funded. Just give me 24 hours. I said. Miles looked at me, confused. What are you going to do? I am going to read the fine print. I said. I went into the house. Lenora intercepted me in the hallway. She was holding a garment bag. Anna, do you have a moment? She asked. It was not a question. She led me into the sunroom. It was a beautiful room, filled with light and expensive plants. She sat on a wicker sofa and patted the cushion beside her. I sat in a separate chair. Graham told me you are hesitating on the paperwork, she said, her voice soft and reasonable. I just have questions. Lenora, about the education fund. Lenora sighed, a sound of profound disappointment. Anna, honey, there is no education fund. I saw it. I said, in the schedule. That was an aspirational placeholder, she said, waving a hand. Your mother had grand ideas, but she was not well. You know that. She would write things down, create accounts in her mind. Graham kept the name on the books just to honor her memory, but there is no money there. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a checkbook. Look, she said, we know things are tight for you. Graham and I talked. We want to help you. She wrote quickly, tore off the check, and placed it on the coffee table between us. I looked at it. It was made out to me. $10,000. Sign the papers, Lenora said. Go back to Chicago. Buy yourself a reliable car. Get some new clothes. Stop asking questions that only hurt your father. I looked at the check. It was a bribe. A cheap, insulting bribe. You think Mom was unstable? I asked. I think she was a lovely woman who lost her grip. Lenora said, her voice hardening. And I think you are heading down the same path, obsessing over details that do not exist, seeing conspiracies. It is not healthy. Anna, she stood up. Take the check, she said. Sign the papers. Do not ruin this weekend. She walked out, leaving the check on the table. I stared at it for a long minute. Then I picked it up. I did not tear it up. I folded it and put it in my pocket. It was evidence that they were desperate to make me go away. That night, the house was finally quiet. Graham and Lenora had gone to a pre-gala cocktail reception. Miles was out with his fiancée. I went into Graham's home office. It was risky. If he came back, there would be hell to pay. But I needed to see the original filing for Northlake Holdings. The office was locked, but the lock was a simple pin tumbler mechanism. I had learned how to pick these during a fraud investigation training course 3 years ago. I used a tension wrench fashioned from a paperclip and a rake tool from my travel sewing kit. It took me 30 seconds. I slipped inside. The room smelled of leather and scotch. I went to the filing cabinet. It was locked too. I didn't have time to pick another lock. I looked around. Graham was arrogant. He wouldn't hide the key well. I checked the top drawer of his desk. Nothing. I checked under the blotter. Nothing. I checked the hollow base of his trophy lamp, the Man of the Year award. There it was, a small silver key. I unlocked the cabinet. I flipped through the hanging folders, Foundation General, tax returns, board minutes. I found a folder labeled Northlake. I pulled it out. Inside were the incorporation documents, Northlake Holdings, LLC. I scanned the page. The registered agent was a lawyer in the Cayman Islands, but the manager was listed as H. Bell, my mother. He had used my mother's name to set up the shell company, but the signature, I looked closely at the signature at the bottom of the page. It read, Helena Bell, but it was wrong. My mother had a distinct way of writing her capital H. She looped the top left. This H was sharp, angular, and the date? The document was dated 6 months after she died. Graham had forged her signature. He had resurrected her on paper to make her the scapegoat for his shell company. I turned the page. There was a list of transactions. Transfer from Bell Foundation, $50,000. Transfer from Bell Foundation, $75,000. Transfer to account ending in 8890. I recognized the account ending in 8890. It was the account number I had seen on a tuition bill for Miles's private graduate school program. I had seen it years ago when Miles had left the bill on the counter. Graham wasn't just stealing. He was using the charity money meant for the public good, money shielded by my mother's name, to pay for his life, to pay for Miles, to pay for the house. And he had named the fund the Helena Bell Restricted Education Fund so that if anyone ever looked too closely, he could claim the money was for family education expenses, but he had never spent a dime of it on me. I pulled out my phone and photographed every page. The forgery, the dates, the transfers. Then I saw something else, a tiny discrepancy. On the third page, the corporate address for Northlake Holdings was listed, 1240 Industrial Parkway. Suite B. I knew that address. I had driven past it 1,000 times growing up. It was not an office building. It was a self-storage facility. Graham Bell, the titan of industry, was running a multi-million-dollar fraud out of a storage unit. I heard the sound of a car door slamming in the driveway. They were home. I shoved the papers back into the folder. I locked the cabinet. I put the key back under the trophy. I slipped out of the office and made it to the stairs just as the front door opened. Anna? Graham's voice boomed from the foyer. I froze on the landing. I am just getting water. I called down, my voice trembling. He walked into the hallway. He looked up at me. His face was flushed with alcohol and triumph. Did you sign the papers? He asked. I am doing it now. I said, Good girl. He said, Leave them on the kitchen table. He turned away. I went up to my room. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I had the proof. I had the forgery. I had the money trail. I sat on the bed and pulled out my phone. I texted Sloan Mercer. I have the smoking gun. Forgery. misappropriation of restricted funds, self-dealing. I need you to draft a formal demand for records, and I need you to prepare an injunction. Sloane replied instantly, I am on it. Be careful. Anna, if he knows you have this, he will come for you. I looked at the documents on my screen. Let him come. I thought, he thinks he is fighting a helpless daughter. He has no idea he is in the cage with a predator. I took the check Lenora had given me. I placed it on the nightstand next to the camera. I took a picture of it. Then I lay down in the dark, listening to the house settle. Tomorrow was the gala. Tomorrow. Graham Bell was going to stand on a stage and tell the world what a great man he was. And I was going to be there, smiling, clapping, and waiting for the exact right moment to pull the rug out from under him. I closed my eyes. But I did not sleep. I rehearsed. I planned. I sharpened my knife. The boardroom of the Bell Foundation was situated on the top floor of the only glass-walled office building in Oakhaven. It was a space designed to intimidate. The table was a slab of polished black granite that seemed to stretch for miles, and the chairs were upholstered in leather that cost more than my first car. I sat in the corner, away from the table, on a chair that was clearly meant for a secretary or an intern. Graham had insisted I attend the pre-gala board meeting. He called it an educational opportunity. I knew it was a power play. He wanted to show the board that he had his family in line, and he wanted to show me exactly how small I was in his world. Graham sat at the head of the table. To his right was Miles, looking pale and sweating slightly through his dress shirt. To his left was Thomas Keller, the contractor I had met at lunch, who looked like a shark sensing blood in the water. Further down sat Elise Marlowe, the treasurer. She was a woman in her 40s with a sharp bob cut and a suit that was perfectly tailored. But her hands were trembling as she arranged her papers. I opened the meeting. Graham announced, his voice projecting as if he were addressing a stadium rather than 12 people. We have a tight agenda. The gala is tomorrow. The redevelopment announcement is Monday. We need to ensure the optics are flawless. He gestured vaguely in my direction without looking at me. My daughter Anna is observing today, he said. She is curious about how the adults handle the serious business of the community. A few board members chuckled politely. I kept my face blank, my hands folded in my lap. I was the dutiful, dull daughter. But my eyes were scanning every face in the room. I watched them as Graham spoke. When he mentioned the redevelopment funds, Thomas Keller leaned back and smirked, tapping his pen on the granite. He was not afraid of Graham. He was a co-conspirator. But when Graham mentioned the compliance audit, dismissing it as a routine annoyance, I saw Elise Marlowe flinch. It was a small movement, a tightening of the jaw, a quick dart of her eyes toward the door. She was the weak link. I need approval on the vendor disbursements for the gala setup, Elise said, her voice thin. The catering overages and the event staging costs are higher than projected. Graham waved a hand. Just pay it. Elise, we cannot have a cheap-looking event. We are close to the threshold for board vote requirements on single vendor payments, Elise warned. If we pay the staging company another $10,000, it triggers a mandatory review. Then do not pay them $10,000, Graham snapped. Pay them $9,000 twice. Split the invoice. Do not clutter the agenda with bureaucracy. The room went silent. I felt a jolt of recognition. Structuring. It was the most basic form of financial evasion, breaking a large transaction into smaller ones to avoid regulatory reporting triggers. He was ordering her to commit fraud in front of 10 witnesses, and no one said a word. Elise looked down at her ledger. Understood, she whispered. I wrote it down in my mental notebook. Friday, 10 a.m. Graham Bell orders structuring of vendor payments, witnessed by full board. The meeting broke up an hour later. I lingered, pretending to admire the view of the town square, waiting for the herd to thin out. Graham was busy shaking hands with the mayor, who had arrived late to pick up a check. I saw Elise Marlowe packing her briefcase with frantic speed. She looked like she was trying to escape a burning building. I intercepted her in the hallway near the restrooms. Elise? I said softly. She jumped, clutching her bag to her chest. Her eyes were wide, the whites visible all around the irises. Oh, Anna, You startled me. I am sorry. I said, I just wanted to ask, is it normal? Is what normal? She was backing away, her heels clicking rapidly on the tile. Splitting the invoices, I said, Dad made it sound so standard, but I thought, stop, Elise hissed. She stepped close to me, her perfume smelling of nervous sweat and expensive florals. Stop looking. Anna, I do not understand, I said, playing the confused innocent. I'm just trying to learn. You are not learning, she said, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and anger. You are digging. I saw you looking at the ledgers. I saw you watching Graham. Just stop. You do not know how this machine works. I looked at her. The fear was real. She wasn't malicious. She was terrified. If something is wrong, Elise, you can tell me. Tell you? She let out a sharp, hysterical laugh. You are his daughter. You are the one person I can never tell. Go back to Chicago. Anna, take whatever allowance he gives you and run. Do not try to be a hero. Heroes in this town get buried. She turned and practically ran down the corridor. I watched her go. She had just confirmed everything. She was the treasurer, the one who signed the checks, and she was terrified of my father. That meant she was likely the one leaving the paper trail I needed. I walked back into the boardroom. The staff was clearing the coffee cups. A stack of financial summaries had been left on the side table for the board members to take. I picked one up and slipped it into my oversized tote bag. I sat in my car in the parking lot of a pharmacy 3 blocks away. I opened the financial summary. It was a sanitized version, meant for the board's eyes. But even sanitized data tells a story if you know how to read the silence between the numbers. I scanned the vendor list. North Lake Logistics, $9,900. Paid June 3rd. North Lake Logistics, $9,900. Paid June 5th. North Lake Logistics, $9,900. Paid June 10th. I felt a cold thrill of professional vindication. It was textbook. The internal control threshold for board approval was likely $10,000. Graham was keeping every payment just under the wire so he could sign the checks himself without a vote. I dialed Calvin Reed. I know you are at work, I said when he answered, but I need you to look at something. I am sending you a picture. I snapped a photo of the ledger page and sent it via encrypted text. I waited. A minute later, Calvin's voice came back on the line. The academic detachment was gone. Anna, he said, this is not just sloppy. This is aggressive. 3 payments to the same vendor in 1 week, all just under the reporting limit? That is intentional structuring. In a federal audit, that is a felony. I know, I said. And look at the vendor category. Calvin continued. Consulting/logistics. That is the black hole of accounting. You can hide anything in there. Who is North Lake Logistics? A shell company, I said. Anna, Calvin's voice dropped. You are not just looking at a hypothetical anymore. Are you? This is real. Where are you? I am safe. Calvin, you do not sound safe. You sound like you are standing on a ledge. If this is the organization I think it is, if this is your family, it is just data. Calvin, I said, cutting him off because his concern was making my throat tight. Just tell me what an auditor would look for next. They would look for the deliverables, Calvin said, falling back into his professional mode. If they paid $30,000 in a week for logistics, there has to be a contract, a shipping manifest, a report, something tangible. If there is no paper trail for the work, then the work never happened, and the money was stolen. There is no work, I said. It is a storage unit. Then you have them. Anna. But you need to be careful. People who steal this kind of money do not like being caught. I hung up. I had the what and the how. Now I needed the why. I needed the motive that tied it all together. I drove back to the house. It was midday, and the caterers were setting up a tent in the backyard for the pre-gala brunch the next morning. Graham was in the sunroom, reading a newspaper. He looked the picture of the relaxed patriarch. I walked in and poured myself a glass of iced tea from the pitcher on the sideboard. That was intense this morning, I said, sitting on the edge of a chair. Graham did not look up. Board meetings are not meant to be entertainment. They are for governance. I noticed something, I said, keeping my voice light. On the old programs in the library, Mom's name. Graham lowered the paper. What about it? You kept listing her as a patron. I said, even when she was in the hospice center. Even when she couldn't speak. Why did you do that? Graham stared at me. His eyes were flat, like shark eyes. Your mother loved this foundation. Anna. It was her life's work. She hated parties. I said, she understood their necessity. He corrected, and she wanted to be remembered. She was terrified of being forgotten. I did that for her. I kept her name alive when she could no longer do it herself. It was an act of love. He smiled then, a cold, smooth stretching of his lips. You would not understand that kind of devotion. Anna, you have never built anything. You have never had a legacy to protect. You only think about yourself. The lie was so smooth it almost slid past my defenses. An act of love. He had used her name to launder money through a shell company, and he called it love. I understand more than you think. I said. Graham laughed. It was a dismissive sound. Go change. Anna, we have guests coming at 2. Try to look less gray. I found Miles in the garage. He was hiding, smoking a cigarette, a habit he only indulged in when Graham was not looking. He jumped when I walked in. Jesus, Anna, don't sneak up on me. He ground the cigarette out on the concrete floor and kicked the butt under a workbench. Dad is in rare form, I said, leaning against the doorframe. Miles exhaled a long stream of smoke. He is stressed. The gala, the audit rumors. He is taking it out on everyone. He used Mom's name, Miles, I said, to hide money. Miles froze. He looked at me, his face pale in the dim light of the garage. Don't. Anna, just don't. I saw the ledger. Miles, Northlake Logistics. It is a shell. And he signed Mom's name to the incorporation papers 6 months after she died. Miles closed his eyes. He slumped against the hood of his car. I knew something was wrong. He whispered. I didn't know the details. But I knew. He looked at me, and his expression crumbled. It wasn't just the money. Anna, what do you mean? Miles hesitated. He looked at the door to make sure we were alone. Years ago, he said, the summer after you graduated college, when you were applying for those grad programs. I stiffened. I had applied to 4 top-tier programs. I had been rejected by all of them. It was the moment my life had derailed. It was the moment I believed I wasn't good enough. What about it? I asked. I came home from practice early one day. Miles said, Dad was by the shredder in his office. He was putting a stack of mail through. I saw a thick envelope. It had a university crest on it. I stopped breathing. Which university? I asked. I don't remember, Miles said. Tearing up. But it was addressed to you, and it was thick. Rejection letters are thin. Anna, acceptance letters are thick. I stared at him. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. He shredded it? He told me it was junk mail, Miles said. He said you were getting credit card offers. But I knew. I knew what it looked like. And he smiled at me and told me to go wash up for dinner. Miles covered his face with his hands. I should have told you. I was 20. I was scared of him. I'm so sorry. Anna. I didn't answer. I couldn't. I turned and walked out of the garage. I walked past the house, past the manicured lawn, and out onto the street. I walked until my legs burned. He hadn't just mocked my failure. He had manufactured it. He had intercepted the letter. He had destroyed the path I had earned. He had kept me in the dark, letting me believe I was inadequate, letting me internalize the rejection, letting me build a life on the foundation of my own worthlessness. And why? To control the estate, to keep me small, to ensure that the only Belle with a future was the one he could control, Miles. I pulled out my phone. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely type. I messaged Sloan Mercer. I need a favor, a big one. I need you to use your contacts in higher ed. Find out if I was accepted to the master's program at Columbia in 2015. Please. I sat on a park bench down the street and waited. The rage was not afire anymore. It was ice. It was a glacier moving through my veins, crushing everything in its path. 20 minutes later, Sloane called. "Anna," she said. Her voice was soft. "Tell me," I said. "I called a friend in the registrar's office." She said, "I had to pull some strings." "Anna, you were accepted, with a full scholarship." I closed my eyes. "A full scholarship." "The letter was sent in April 2015, Sloane said. "It was never returned. They assumed you declined. It was funded by an external grant." She added, "A donor-advised fund. The donor was listed as the Bell Foundation." I let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. He had arranged the scholarship using his own foundation's money, my mother's money, to look good to the university, and then he had destroyed the acceptance letter so I couldn't take it. He had paid for my success to boost his ego, and then destroyed it to keep his control. "He is a monster," I whispered. "He is going to prison." Sloane said, "We have enough for the injunction now. The theft is bad. The fraud is bad. But interfering with federal mail? That is a federal crime." "Not yet," I said. "Not until everyone knows." I walked back to the house. I felt different. I looked different. The Anna who had arrived yesterday, the cautious, wounded daughter, was dead. The woman walking up the driveway was a weapon. I entered the house and found a scene from a nightmare. Lenora was in the living room. She was sitting with a woman who held a digital recorder. I recognized her. It was the lifestyle reporter for the local paper, a woman named Candace who wrote puff pieces about the town's elite. "Oh, Anna," Lenora chirped. "Perfect timing. Come join us." I stood in the doorway. "We are doing a little profile on the family ahead of the gala," Lenora said, smiling sweetly. "I was just telling Candace about how distinct everyone's paths are. Miles with the business, and you with your journey of self-discovery." Candace smiled at me. It was a pitying smile. "Lenora says you are taking some time to find yourself." Candace said, "That is so brave. In today's economy, it is hard to step back from the rat race." I looked at Lenora. She was doing it again, publicly framing me as the lost, aimless child. She was planting the narrative so that if I ever spoke up, I would look like a jealous failure lashing out at my successful family, turning humiliation into content. I sat down. I crossed my legs. I smiled. "It has been a journey," I said, my voice steady. "I have learned a lot about what really matters, about truth and legacy. That is beautiful," Candace cooed. "And are you planning to stay in Oakhaven?" I looked at Graham, who had just entered the room and was watching me with a warning in his eyes. "I am here until the work is done," I said. Graham relaxed slightly. He thought I meant the gala. I meant the demolition. That night, I did not sleep. I turned my room into a war room. I laid everything out on the floor. The photos of the quitclaim deed, the forged incorporation papers for Northlake, the financial summaries showing the structuring, the note from my mother's journal, the check from Lenora, and the timeline I was now building on a pad of legal paper. 2015. Graham launches Education Initiative. I apply to grad school. Acceptance letter arrives. Graham destroys it. 2016. Mother gets sick. Graham takes power of attorney. 2017. Mother dies. Graham creates Northlake Holdings with forged signature. 2018 to 2024. Restricted Education Fund transfers begin. Money flows to Northlake. No scholarships awarded. 2025. Graham pushes for Riverside redevelopment. Northlake listed as contractor. 2026. Stated G rumors begin. Graham attempts to force me to sign waiver to tidy up the fraud before audit. It was a perfect circle. He had used my failure, which he caused, to justify his control over the money. He had used the money, which he stole, to build his reputation, and he was using his reputation to secure the city contract that would refill the coffers he had drained. He was a parasite. He had eaten my mother's legacy, and he had tried to eat my future. I picked up my phone. I sent a message to Calvin and Sloane. "I have the motive. I have the timeline. I am ready. Sloan replied, The injunction is drafted. I can file it electronically on Monday morning. But if you want to stop the gala, we need to serve him. No, I typed. Let him have his gala. Let him get on that stage. Let him believe he has won. Why? Calvin asked. Because I want witnesses. I wrote. I looked at the dress hanging on the back of the door. The plain, gray, invisible dress. I walked over to it. I took a pair of scissors from the desk drawer. I cut the tag off. Then I reached into my bag and pulled out the dress I had brought with me, hidden in the lining of my suitcase. It was not gray. It was black, sharp, tailored, a power suit in the form of a gown. It was the dress of a woman who makes 6 figures and hunts criminals for a living. I was done hiding. I checked into the Oakhaven Grand Hotel on Friday afternoon. I told Graham and Lenora that I wanted to get out of their hair while they prepared the house for the VIP reception. Claiming I needed space to prepare myself for the big night, in reality, I needed a perimeter. I needed a door I could lock that Graham did not have a key to. The room was generic luxury, beige walls, heavy curtains, and the smell of industrial cleaner. I threw my bag on the bed and went to the bathroom to splash cold water on my face. When I came back out, there was a white envelope on the floor. Just inside the door, I froze. I had been in the bathroom for 2 minutes. I had heard nothing. I walked over and picked it up. It was plain stationery, no letterhead. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed on a typewriter. The ink faint in places. He is watching your calls. Do not trust the house Wi-Fi. He logs the traffic. The fear that gripped me was specific. It was not the theatrical fear of a thriller movie. It was the cold, sinking dread of realizing how tight the net actually was. I thought about the text messages I had sent from the guest room. I had used encryption, but if he was logging traffic, he would see the data packets going to a server he did not recognize. He would know I was communicating with someone, even if he did not know what I was saying. I looked at the door. There was no peephole. I stepped into the hallway. It was empty. The carpet was thick, absorbing footsteps. I went back inside and engaged the deadbolt. I turned off the hotel Wi-Fi on my phone and switched to cellular data. I felt a sudden, sharp appreciation for the note. Someone was looking out for me. I met Elise Marlowe an hour later at a diner on the outskirts of town, a place where truck drivers and third-shift nurses ate breakfast at 3 p.m. It was the last place Graham Bell would ever set foot. Elise was sitting in a booth in the back, wearing a hooded raincoat despite the clear skies. She looked like she had not slept in days. "You came," she said, her voice barely a whisper. I slid into the booth opposite her. "Who sent the note?" "Elise?" She shook her head rapidly. "Not me. I would not dare put anything in writing that could be traced to the hotel. It must have been Miles. Or maybe the housekeeper. Graham is not careful with who he insults." She pushed a menu away. "I cannot stay long. If he knows I'm talking to you—" "Elise," I said, keeping my voice low and steady, "you are already talking to me. Make it count. Tell me about the legacy accounts." Elise flinched at the term. She wrapped her hands around a mug of black coffee. "He does not just use the foundation," she said. "He uses the names, the dead ones, your mother, his parents. He sets up custodial accounts in their names, attached to the charitable trusts. He calls them legacy accounts. And the money?" I asked. "It cycles," she said. "Donations come in from the developers, the ones who want the city contracts. We deposit them into the legacy accounts as anonymous bequests. Then the money moves to the subsidiaries, like Northlake, for services rendered. And then it goes to him." I finished. Elise nodded. "It covers his debts, the mortgage, the lifestyle. He is leveraging the entire endowment to float his personal insolvency. But it is worse now. Anna, the redevelopment deal, what about it?" "He has promised donor silence," she said. She reached into her purse and slid a folded piece of paper across the table. It was a photocopy of an email thread. I unfolded it. The subject line was "Confidential Side Letter. Riverside Project." The email was from Graham to Thomas Keller. Thomas, per our discussion, the buy-in for the Riverside contract will be routed through the Helena Bell Education Fund to ensure privacy. The side letter guarantees that these funds will be reclassified as operational expenses within the fiscal quarter, ensuring no public disclosure of the donor source. My daughter's name on the fund provides the necessary cover for the family legacy exemption in the reporting bylaws. I stared at the paper. My daughter's name on the fund provides the necessary cover. He was not just stealing, he was selling silence. He was turning my mother's name and my name into a laundry service for bribes. This is the smoking gun, I said. Elise looked at me, her eyes pleading. I cannot testify. Anna, I have a pension. I have a sick husband. If I go on the record, Graham will destroy us before the police even knock on his door. He knows judges. He knows the sheriff. You do not have to testify yet. I said, just give me this. Let me be the one who burns him. Elise nodded, tears welling in her eyes. Be careful. Anna, he thinks you are stupid. That is your only advantage. If he realizes you are smart, he will stop playing games. I sat in my car outside the diner and called Sloan. I have it. I said, I have the email linking the bribes to the education fund. Good. Sloan said. Her voice was sharp, professional. That gives us standing. Since the fund is named after you, or at least purports to be for your benefit, you have a direct legal interest. We can file for an emergency injunction to freeze the assets. When? I asked. We can file Monday morning, Sloan said. But Anna, if we file, the state will step in. The accounts will be locked. The investigation will go public. That is the point. I said, yes, but it means the gala tomorrow night is the last time he will feel safe. Sloan said, it is the last time he will believe he is in control. I looked at the diner through the windshield. I saw Elise Marlowe walk out, head down, disappearing into the gray afternoon. I do not just want to stop him. Sloan, I said, I want to expose him. I want the people in that room, the donors, the mayor, the people who looked down on me for 10 years, to see exactly what he is. Then do not file until Monday. Sloan advised, let him get on that stage, let him make his speech, and then, you tell the truth. I hung up. The plan was solidifying. It was going to be a demolition. My phone rang. It was Graham. Anna. He said. His voice was different, softer, warmer. Hello. Dad, I am at the club, he said. I am having a light lunch on the terrace. Just me. I want you to join me. I hesitated. I am tired. Dad, please, he said. It is just the two of us. No donors, no Lenora. I want to talk to my daughter before the madness of the weekend starts. It was a trap. I knew it was a trap, but I needed to look him in the eye one last time. I needed to see if there was anything left of the father I had wanted as a child. I will be there in 20 minutes, I said. The terrace of the country club overlooked the 18th green. It was quiet, the air smelling of cut grass and privilege. Graham was sitting at a small table under a parasol, drinking iced tea. He stood up when I approached. He pulled out my chair. Thank you for coming, he said. He looked tired. For the first time, I saw the lines around his eyes, the slight tremor in his hands. I ordered you the Cobb salad, he said. You used to love that. I sat down. I haven't eaten a Cobb salad since I was 12. Dad. He smiled. A sad, wistful expression. Is that right? I suppose I still see you as that little girl sometimes, with the braces and the books. He took a sip of tea. I have been hard on you this weekend. Anna, he said. I didn't answer. I just watched him. I know I have. He continued. I can be demanding. But you have to understand, the pressure on this family is immense. The foundation, the community, everyone looks to us. He reached across the table and placed his hand over mine. His palm was warm. I pushed you because I was afraid, he said. Afraid of what? I asked. Afraid you would fail, he said softly. The world is a cruel place. Anna, it eats people who are not strong, When I saw you struggling, drifting from job to job, it terrified me. I thought if I was tough on you, if I showed you the standard, you would rise to meet it. He squeezed my hand. I did it because I love you. Anna, I did not want you to be ordinary. I felt a lump form in my throat. It was a treacherous, dangerous lump. It was the part of me that was 5 years old, waiting for him to come home from work. The part of me that wanted to believe him. He was afraid for me. Maybe he wasn't a monster. Maybe he was just a flawed man who didn't know how to parent. Then he sighed and withdrew his hand. That is why I need you to sign the papers. Anna. The spell broke. The lump in my throat vanished, replaced by a shard of ice. To protect you, he said, his voice regaining its business cadence. This audit, it is a nuisance. But if the state sees those old accounts with your mother's name, they will drag us through the mud. They will drag you through the mud. If you sign the waiver, I can shield you. I can make sure your name stays out of the papers. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the folded document. He placed a silver pen on top of it. Do it for me, Anna. Do it so we can be a family again. I looked at the pen. It was a Mont Blanc, expensive, heavy. He wasn't afraid I would fail. He was afraid I would succeed in exposing him. The love was just a lubricant to get the signature. I looked up at him. I saw the calculation in his eyes. He was watching me like a poker player watches an opponent, waiting for the fold. I left the papers at the house. I lied. He tapped the document on the table. I brought a fresh copy. I cannot sign it now. Dad, I said, I need to have a witness. For it to be legal. His eyes narrowed. A flash of the real Graham broke through the mask. We can get a waiter to witness it, he said sharply. No, I said, I want to do it right. Tomorrow, before the gala, I will sign it then. Graham stared at me. He was weighing the risk. He decided that one more day wouldn't hurt, as long as he kept me close. Fine, he said, putting the pen away. Tomorrow. But do not test me. Anna, I am offering you a bridge. Do not burn it. I stood up. I am not burning anything. Dad, I am just reading the map. When I got back to the hotel, Miles was waiting in the lobby. He was wearing sunglasses, though it was dim inside. He looked like he was about to vomit. Anna, he hissed, grabbing my elbow. We need to talk. Not here. He dragged me toward the elevators. We went up to my room. When the door closed, Miles collapsed onto the armchair. He pulled a small metal box out of his satchel. I found it, he said. What is it? It was in the back of the safe in the library. Miles said, I knew the combination because I saw him use it once. This box. It has Mom's initials on it. He held it out to me. His hands were shaking so badly the box rattled. I opened it. It was not locked. Inside were papers. Old papers. I pulled out the top sheet. It was a draft of a speech, typed, with handwritten edits in Graham's distinct, sharp script. Speech for the 2018 Gala, Draft 3. I read the opening paragraph. Tonight, we celebrate not just charity, but family. I am proud to announce that the Bell Foundation has fully endowed the education of my daughter. Anna, though she has chosen a private path, it is my great honor to support her academic journey at. The university name was left blank. He had written a speech taking credit for funding my education, the education he had blocked me from getting. I flipped the page. There was a list of talking points labeled confidential. For crisis management. 1. If asked about Anna's absence, cite personal health struggles. 2. If asked about Anna's employment, emphasize family support and rescue interventions. 3. Narrative arc. The Bell Foundation saves the vulnerable. Starting at home, I felt the air leave the room. He had not just ignored me, he had scripted me. He had written a character for me to play. The broken, rescued failure, so that he could look like the savior. He needed me to be worthless so that his support looked heroic. If I had succeeded, if I had gone to Columbia, if I had become a powerful woman on my own, he would have lost his prop. He sabotaged me to make his story work. I looked at Miles. He was crying. silent, shaking tears. He hates us. Miles whispered, "He doesn't love us. He just owns us." I walked over and put a hand on Miles's shoulder. "He does not own us. Miles, not anymore." I took the box. I took the speech. I took the talking points. "Go home." "Miles," I said, "put the box back in the safe." "But you have the papers," he said. "I took pictures." I said, "I do not need the originals. Put the box back. Act normal." "What are you going to do?" Miles asked. "I'm going to finish the story he started." I said, "But I'm going to write the ending." That night, I sat at the small desk in the hotel room. I had everything. I had the financial structuring. I had the forged incorporation papers. I had the email proving the bribery. I had the stolen acceptance letter confirmed. And now, I had the script. I looked at the invitation to the gala. Black tie, 7 o'clock, the grand ballroom. Graham wanted a coronation. He wanted to stand on that stage and receive the adulation of the city while I sat in the audience. A silent, grateful prop. He wanted me to sign the waiver tomorrow. He thought he had won. He thought I was the scared little girl who craved his approval. I picked up my phone and called Sloan. "Do not file the injunction yet," I said. "Are you sure?" Sloan asked. "Positive. I want the assets frozen, but I want the freeze to hit while he is on that stage. Can you time the filing?" "I can file electronically at 7:30 p.m. Saturday." Sloan said, "The notification will hit the Foundation's legal counsel immediately. Do it," I said. "And Anna?" Sloan added, "Do not let him see you coming." I looked at my reflection in the dark window. "He won't," I said. "He's too busy looking at himself." I hung up. I laid out my black dress on the bed. It looked like a shadow. Tomorrow night, Graham Bell was going to find out that the daughter he wrote off as uneducated had learned exactly how to destroy him, and I was going to use his own lessons to do it. The reveal had to be surgical. No screaming, no crying, just facts, presented to the people who mattered. I turned off the light. I did not need to sleep. I needed to wait. The grand ballroom of the Oak Haven Hotel had been transformed into a temple of gold silk and white lilies. It was a space designed to smell like money. A thick, cloying scent of expensive perfume, roast beef, and old ambition. I stood near the entrance, wearing the black dress I had retrieved from my suitcase. It was a simple column of fabric, high-necked and long-sleeved, devoid of sequins or lace. To the casual observer, I looked like a staff member or a particularly dour relative. To my father, I looked like a woman who knew her place in the shadows. Graham Bell stood in the center of the room, positioned directly under the crystal chandelier so that the light caught the silver in his hair. He was in his element. He wore a tuxedo that fit him like a second skin. One hand resting casually in his pocket, the other holding a glass of scotch. He was holding court with the mayor and 3 members of the city council. I watched him from the periphery. I watched him gesture toward me when a donor asked a question. I saw the donor look at me, offer a pitying smile, and nod. Graham was telling the story. He was weaving the narrative of the difficult, troubled daughter who had finally come home to be rescued. I took a glass of sparkling water from a passing tray and moved closer. Just close enough to hear the performance. "She is trying," Graham was saying. His voice lowered to a confidential rumble. "It has been a long road. We are just happy she is stable enough to be here tonight. We never gave up on her. Family is a marathon, not a sprint." The mayor patted Graham on the back. "You are a good man, Graham. A saint. Really. Most fathers would have cut her loose years ago." I kept my face impassive. A saint. The man who had shredded my acceptance letter and forged my mother's signature was being canonized for tolerating my existence. I turned away, needing a moment to breathe before I did something reckless. I scanned the room, looking for Elise Marlowe. I needed to know where she was sitting. I needed to make sure she didn't bolt. Instead of Elise, my eyes landed on a figure standing near the bar. He was tall, wearing a suit that was off the rack. Gray, practical, not a tuxedo. He was scanning the crowd with the critical, bored expression of someone who was working. My heart stopped. It was Calvin Reed. I froze behind a pillar. Calvin was my colleague in Chicago. He was the senior compliance analyst who sat 3 desks away from me. He knew me as Anna, the woman who brought lentil soup for lunch and caught rounding errors in the 3rd decimal point. He did not know me as Anna Bell, the heiress to a fraudulent foundation. I had texted him the evidence, but I had never explicitly stated the name of the target. I had kept it hypothetical. What was he doing here? I watched as a woman with a lanyard approached him. She was the director of the State Association of Nonprofits, of course. The gala was a regional event. The oversight panel had sent observers. I realized with a jolt of panic that my 2 worlds were not just colliding. They were crashing into each other at high speed. If Calvin saw me here, in this context, before I controlled the narrative, he might think I was part of the scam. He might think I was the inside man helping my father steal the money. I had to get to him first. I took a breath, smoothed the front of my dress, and walked toward the bar. "Calvin," I said. He turned, swirling his ginger ale. His eyes went wide when he saw me. He looked at my face, then at my dress, then back at my face. "Anna?" he asked. "What on earth are you doing here? I thought you were taking a personal weekend." "I am," I said, stepping close to him so we could not be overheard. "This is my hometown." "Calvin." He looked around the room, taking in the opulence, the banners reading the Bell Foundation, the massive portrait of my father on the stage. "Bell," he said. He looked at the banner, Graham Bell. He looked back at me, the pieces falling into place behind his wire-rimmed glasses. "Your last name is Bell," he said slowly. "This is your family." "Yes." Calvin set his glass down on the bar. The friendliness vanished from his face, replaced by a cold, professional wariness. "Anna," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "The hypothetical scenario you sent me, the structuring, the shell company, the education fund, it is this foundation." I said, "And you are the daughter of the board chair?" "Yes." Calvin took a half step back. "You need to tell me right now. Anna, are you investigating this, or are you part of it? Because if you are part of it, I have a legal obligation to report you to the firm's ethics officer immediately. I am the whistleblower, Calvin," I said, keeping my gaze steady. "I am the one who sent you the ledger. I am the one building the case." Calvin studied me. He was a human lie detector. It was his job. He looked for the micro-expressions, the tells. He saw the tension in my jaw, the lack of jewelry, the way I was standing with my back to the wall. "You are the victim." He realized. "The education fund, the one that was emptied, that was yours." "Supposed to be," I said. Calvin let out a long breath. "Jesus, Anna, you are walking into a fire." "I know." I said, "That is why I need you to stay. I need a witness who understands the math. When I speak tonight, I need someone in the room who knows I'm telling the truth." "You are going to speak?" he asked. "I am going to finish the audit." I said. Calvin looked at Graham across the room. He adjusted his glasses. "Okay," he said. "I am here. I am watching. But Anna, if this goes south, I cannot save you. I am just an observer. That is all I need." I said. I left Calvin and made a circuit of the room. I found Elise Marlowe sitting at table 12, near the kitchen doors. She was alone, her husband presumably too ill to attend. She was clutching her clutch bag like a life preserver. She saw me and stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. She looked ready to run. "Elise," I said, reaching her before she could bolt. "Sit down. I cannot do this," she whispered, her eyes darting around the room. "He knows. He looked at me during the cocktail hour. He knows I talked to someone. He does not know anything," I said, placing a hand on her arm. "He is paranoid." "Elise, that is good. Paranoid men make mistakes. I want to leave," she said. "I feel sick. If you leave now, you look guilty." I told her, "You have to stay. You have to sit here and eat your salad and clap your hands. I cannot testify." "Anna, I told you, You won't have to. I said, not tonight. Just sit here. When the moment comes, all you have to do is tell the truth to the people who ask. Who will ask? The auditors. I said, and they are coming. Elise stared at me. She saw something in my face that seemed to settle her, or perhaps terrify her into compliance. She sat back down. I will try, she whispered. That is enough. I said. The lights dimmed. A hush fell over the room as the orchestra played a fanfare. The spotlight swept across the crowd and landed on the stage. Graham walked out. The applause was thunderous. People stood up. These were the people he had charmed, the people he had bought, the people who wanted to believe that Oakhaven was a place of goodness and light. Graham waved, a humble, gracious gesture. He adjusted the microphone. Thank you, he said, his voice rich and warm. Thank you all. 20 years ago, when my late wife Helena and I started this foundation, we had a simple dream. We wanted to build a legacy that would outlast us. He paused, letting the silence build. Helena is not here with us tonight, he said, looking up toward the ceiling as if consulting with angels. But her spirit is in every brick of the new art center, in every meal served at the shelter, and in the heart of this community. I stood in the shadows near the stage. I felt a cold rage tightening my chest. He was using her. He was using the woman he had isolated and gaslit as a prop for his own glorification. I remembered the notebook I had found in the box. If anything happens, don't let him rewrite me. He was rewriting her right now. He was turning her into a silent saint who approved of his theft. Tonight, Graham continued, we are launching our most ambitious project yet, the Riverside Redevelopment, a partnership that will transform our city, and we are doing it with the full support of the Helena Bell Education Fund, ensuring that the future of our youth is secured alongside our infrastructure. A ripple of applause went through the room. The lie was so bold. He was publicly linking the stolen money to the new project. He was doubling down. I felt a vibration in my pocket, a text. I pulled out my phone, shielding the screen. It was Sloan. The injunction is ready. We are locked and loaded. Just say the word. I looked at the stage. Graham was smiling, basking in the adoration. Not yet. I thought, let him dig the hole a little deeper. Graham finished his speech and stepped down to more applause. The waiters began serving the main course. I remained standing. A ghost at the feast. Lenora appeared at my elbow. She was wearing a red dress that was cut aggressively low, diamonds glittering at her throat. She smelled of expensive wine. You are hovering. Anna, she said, her voice a sharp whisper. It makes people uncomfortable. Go sit at your table. I am fine standing. I said, you look like a vulture. She snapped. Graham is very disappointed in you. He thought you would have the decency to sign the papers before the gala. He feels you are holding the family hostage. I am just reading the fine print. Lenora. Lenora stepped closer. Her smile remained fixed for the benefit of the room, but her eyes were venomous. Listen to me, you ungrateful little girl, she hissed. You think you have leverage? You have nothing. We have been very patient with your eccentricities, but if you cause a scene tonight, or if you refuse to sign that waiver tomorrow, things will get ugly. Is that a threat? I asked. It is a promise, she said. I had a long talk with Candace from the paper today. She was very interested to hear about your medical leave in 2018. The stress leave? When you were hospitalized for exhaustion? I stiffened. I had taken a month off work 3 years after college because I had worked myself into a state of collapse trying to prove I wasn't worthless. It was a private medical matter. It would be a shame. Lenora continued. If the narrative shifted, if people found out that poor Anna isn't a victim, but a mentally unstable woman who has a history of delusions, who invents problems to get attention, who needs to be managed for her own safety. She reached out and patted my cheek. Sign the papers, Anna, or we will release your medical records to the board to show why you are unfit to manage any estate assets. We will paint you as crazy, and everyone in this room will believe us, because they know Graham, and nobody knows you. She turned and walked away. her red dress swishing like a warning flag. I stood there, feeling the blood drain from my face. They were going to weaponize my mental health. They were going to use my own struggle, a struggle caused by their abuse, to discredit me. It was the ultimate gaslight. I looked at my phone. The text from Sloan was still on the screen. Just say the word. I looked at the room. I saw Miles sitting at the head table, staring at his plate, looking like he wanted to disappear. I saw Elise Marlowe trembling. I saw Calvin watching me from the bar. And I saw a donor, the man I had met at lunch, Elias Thorne. He was walking toward the restroom, passing close to where I stood. He stopped when he saw me. "Anna," he said. "Good evening, Mr. Thorne," I said. "Your father gave a beautiful speech." He said, "He really loves this town. He does." I said automatically, "You know," Thorne said, lowering his voice. I was thinking about what he said, about the education fund. It is a wonderful thing. Are you grateful? I looked at him. "Excuse me?" "For the education." He said, "Your father mentioned that the foundation funded your studies. That must have been a great gift. To graduate without debt? To have that kind of support? It is a rare privilege." He smiled. A genuine, kindly smile. He believed it. Graham had told him, and probably half the room, that I was the beneficiary of the fund. He had planted the lie so deep that any question I raised about the money would look like ingratitude. I looked at Thorne. "Yes," I said quietly. "It would be a rare privilege." Thorne nodded and walked away. The anger that had been ice turned into something else. It turned into clarity. If I filed the injunction quietly, on Monday, they would spin it. They would say I was a crazy, ungrateful daughter suing her philanthropic father. They would leak the medical records. They would win the court of public opinion before the judge even banged the gavel. I couldn't fight them in the shadows. They owned the shadows. I had to drag them into the light. I looked at the stage. The microphone was still there, standing on the podium. The band was taking a break. Graham was at his table, laughing with the mayor. I started walking. I walked past the tables. I walked past Lenora, who was holding court with a group of socialites. I walked past Miles, who looked up and went white when he saw where I was headed. I walked up the stairs to the stage. The sound of my heels on the wooden floor echoed slightly. A few people looked up. Graham turned his head. His smile faltered for a second, then reattached itself. He thought I was coming to pay tribute. He thought I had finally broken, that I was coming to play the role of the grateful daughter. I reached the podium. I touched the microphone. It was live. I looked out at the sea of faces. 400 people, the wealthiest, most powerful people in Oakhaven. I saw Calvin straighten up at the bar. I saw Elise cover her mouth with her hand. Graham stood up halfway at his table, looking uncertain. I tapped the mic. Thump, thump. The room went quiet. The conversation died down. "Good evening," I said. My voice was steady. It did not sound like the voice of a girl who had been crying in a guest room. It sounded like the voice of a woman who charged $300 an hour to find the truth. My father, Graham Bell, just gave a moving speech about legacy. I continued. He spoke about my mother, Helena Bell, and he spoke about the importance of education. Graham sat back down, looking relieved. He nodded at me, encouraging the sentiment. I wanted to add a few words. I said, because my mother cannot be here to speak for herself, and because there are things about her legacy that have been kept private until now, I gripped the sides of the podium. My mother did value education. I said, she valued it so much that she created a specific fund, the Helena Bell Restricted Education Fund. It was designed to help students who had the talent but not the means. I looked directly at Graham. His smile was starting to freeze. He sensed the shift in the air. My father mentioned tonight that this fund supported me. I said, he has told many of you that the foundation paid for my education, that I am the result of that generosity. I paused. I let the silence stretch until it was uncomfortable. I want to correct the record. I said. Graham stood up. "Anna," he said, his voice loud but jovial. We do not need to bore the guests with family details. I am not boring them. Dad, I said into the mic, my voice overriding his. I am informing them. I looked back at the crowd. I never received a dime from the Helena Bell Education Fund. I stated clearly, my tuition was paid by student loans, which I'm still repaying. My graduate degree was funded by a fellowship I won on my own merits. A murmur went through the room, a sound of confusion, of glass cracking. In fact, I continued, no student has ever received a dime from that fund. Graham was moving now. He was walking toward the stage, his face dark with fury. Anna, step down. You are not well. I did not step down. I leaned into the mic. For the past 5 years, the Helena Bell Restricted Education Fund has transferred over $200,000 to a subsidiary called Northlake Logistics. I said, reciting the numbers from memory. Northlake Logistics has no employees. It has no trucks. It operates out of a self-storage unit on Industrial Parkway. Graham reached the stairs. Cut the mic, he shouted to the sound engineer, but the engineer was too slow, or perhaps too stunned. I am not here to ruin the party, I said, my voice ringing out hard and cold. I am here to tell you who I really am. I am not the uneducated failure my father told you I was. I am a forensic accountant, and I have the bank records that prove my mother's signature was forged on the Northlake Incorporation papers 6 months after she died. The room exploded. It wasn't applause. It was a gasp, a collective intake of breath that sucked the oxygen out of the ballroom. Graham lunged for me. He grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my flesh. You ungrateful bitch, he hissed. Too low for the mic, but loud enough for me. I will destroy you. I looked at him. I looked at the man who had terrified me for 30 years, and I felt nothing but contempt. You cannot destroy what you did not build. Graham, I said. I pulled my arm free. I turned back to the mic one last time. My attorney has just filed an injunction to freeze the foundation's assets. I announced, I suggest the board members check their emails. I stepped back from the podium. Graham stood there, center stage, his face a mask of purple rage. He looked out at the audience, expecting them to rally to him, expecting them to see me as the crazy daughter Lenora had promised. But they weren't looking at him with sympathy. They were looking at him with math. They were doing the calculation. Restricted fund, shell company, forged signature. I walked down the stairs. Calvin Reed was standing near the front now. He raised his glass to me, a silent toast. Elise Marlowe was standing up. She wasn't running. She was looking at Graham with a strange, terrified resolve. Lenora was frantically typing on her phone, likely trying to kill the medical record story, but it was too late. The story wasn't about my mental health anymore. It was about the money. I walked through the crowd. The sea parted for me. People stared, their mouths open, their champagne glasses forgotten. I walked past Thomas Keller, the contractor. He looked like he was about to vomit. I walked past the mayor. He was already on his phone, turning his back on the stage. I reached the back of the room and pushed open the double doors. The cool air of the lobby hit me. I didn't run. I didn't cry. I walked to the elevators, pressed the button, and waited, inside the ballroom. The noise was rising. It was the sound of a kingdom crumbling. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't the one buried under the rubble. The room was not just silent. It was vacuum-sealed. The air had been sucked out by the revelation of the forged signature, leaving 400 people staring at me in a state of suspended animation. I stood at the podium, the wood cool under my damp palms. I did not retreat. I did not shake. I had spent 10 years making myself small so that my family would not see me as a threat. Now, I had to make myself large so that the world would see me as a witness. I looked directly at the camera crew near the back, the one Lenora had hired to document the family triumph. The red light was still on. My father has spent the evening telling you that I am uneducated. I said into the microphone. My voice did not tremble. It was pitched low, projecting to the back of the room without shouting. He has told you that I am a drifter, that I am a project he has been trying to fix. I paused, letting his earlier words hang in the air like smoke. That was a necessary lie. I continued. It was a cover story. The truth is that I hold a Master of Science in Forensic Accounting. For the last 7 years, I have worked as a senior analyst for a compliance firm in Chicago. I specialize in nonprofit fraud and embezzlement. A murmur rippled through the front tables. I saw the mayor lean forward, his eyes narrowing. He was doing the math. If I was an expert, then what I had just said about the forgery was not a daughter's tantrum. It was a professional opinion. I kept my credentials hidden from my family for a reason. I said, because I knew that if Graham Bell knew I had the skills to read his ledgers, he would have done everything in his power to stop me. He prefers his women incapable. It makes the accounting easier. Graham was at the bottom of the stairs now. He had stopped lunging. He was adjusting his cufflinks, composing his face into a mask of pitying indulgence. He was trying to pivot. He was trying to turn this into a scene from a soap opera so the donors could dismiss it. "Anna," he called out, his voice booming without a microphone. "You are making a scene. We know you are upset about the estate settlement, but this is not the place to air your delusions. Please, step down before you embarrass the memory of your mother." He played the card again. The memory of your mother. I did not step down. I leaned closer to the mic. "I am not here for the estate. Graham," I said, "I am here because for the last 6 months, I have been the anonymous whistleblower cooperating with the State Compliance Review into this foundation." The gasp this time was sharper. It was the sound of fear. Every donor in the room who had used the foundation for a tax write-off suddenly wondered if their name was in my files. "I have submitted documentation to the Attorney General's office," I continued. "This documentation ties the restricted funds from the Helena Bell Education Fund directly to your personal accounts. Graham. It tracks the flow of money from donor silence agreements into the shell company, Northlake Logistics." "You are lying," Graham shouted. The mask slipped. The veins in his neck bulged against his collar. "You are sick. Anna, you have always been unstable. Lenora, get her off the stage." He turned to the crowd, spreading his hands. "She is off her medication," he yelled. "She has a history of paranoia. She thinks the world is out to get her." I let him scream. I let him show them the rage that lived beneath the charm. When he stopped for breath, I spoke again. "Is it paranoia that you intercepted my scholarship acceptance letter from Columbia University in 2015? I asked. Graham froze. "Is it paranoia that you shredded it in your office while Miles watched?" I asked. "Is it paranoia that you then used foundation money to donate to the university to boost your own profile, while telling me I wasn't good enough to get in?" I saw Miles at the head table. He had his head in his hands. He was not looking at me. He was weeping. "That is a lie," Graham spat. But his voice lacked the earlier conviction. He looked at Miles. "Miles, tell them. Tell them she is making it up." Miles did not look up. He did not speak. His silence was a gavel coming down. "And the email," I said, "the side letter regarding the Riverside redevelopment. The one where you promised Thomas Keller that his buy-in would be hidden in the education fund to avoid public disclosure?" I looked at Thomas Keller. He was sitting 3 tables away. He was pale, his mouth slightly open. He looked like a man watching a car crash he was currently sitting inside. "I have the email. Graham," I said, "I have the timestamps. I have the server logs." Graham looked at Keller. Keller looked away. The alliance was breaking. The silence was fracturing. "This is absurd," Graham stammered. He was sweating now. The spotlight was merciless. This is a misunderstanding of complex financial structures. You do not understand how these things work. Anna, you are a data entry clerk. I am a certified fraud examiner." I corrected him. "And I understand exactly how structuring works. I understand why you split the vendor payments into amounts of $9,900. I understand why the incorporation papers for Northlake have a signature that does not match my mother's hand." I pointed to the back of the room. "And I am not the only one who understands." All eyes turned to where I was pointing. Calvin Reed was standing. He looked out of place in his gray suit, a splash of sobriety in a sea of tuxedos. He held his glass of ginger ale like a weapon. "Mr. Bell," Calvin said. His voice was not amplified. But in the silence of the room, it carried. "Who are you?" Graham demanded. "My name is Calvin Reed." He said, "I am a senior compliance analyst with the firm of Mercer Associates in Chicago. I am here as an observer for the State Association of Nonprofits." Graham went white. "I have reviewed the ledger snapshots that were provided to me." Calvin said. He spoke with the dry, terrifying calm of a bureaucrat. "The pattern of disbursements to the Northlake entity is consistent with what we call circular financing. It is a textbook indicator of self-dealing." He adjusted his glasses. "Mr. Bell, given the accusations made by a qualified financial professional, will the Foundation voluntarily open its books for a third-party audit effective immediately? To clear the air?" It was the perfect trap. If Graham said yes, he was finished. If he said no, he looked guilty. Graham opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked at his lawyers at table 4. The lawyers were busy putting papers into their briefcases. They were not coming to save him. They were mitigating their own liability. A movement at the front of the room caught my eye. A man in a dark suit, the city manager, quietly stood up from his chair. He did not look at Graham. He did not look at me. He walked quickly toward the exit, pulling his phone from his pocket. He was making the call that would distance the city from the redevelopment project before the morning papers hit the stands. Then, at table 12, a chair scraped. Elise Marlowe stood up. She was trembling. Her napkin was clutched in her hand like a surrender flag. Her face was blotchy, and her eyes were red. But she was standing. Graham saw her. His eyes widened. "Elise," he warned, "sit down." Elise looked at him. For 20 years, she had been his creature. She had signed what he told her to sign. She had hidden what he told her to hide. She had lived in fear of his temper and his power. But looking at him now, stripped of his charm, sweating under the lights, he didn't look like a king. He looked like a thief in a tuxedo. "I will cooperate," Elise said. Her voice was thin, shaking, but audible. "Elise!" Graham shouted. "I will cooperate with the investigators," she said. Louder this time. She looked at me. "I will provide the original invoices and the side letters. I cannot do this anymore." She sat back down and covered her face with her hands. The sound that followed was the sound of a dam breaking. The room erupted into whispers, then voices, then shouts. Graham stood alone on the floor. He looked around wildly. He looked at the mayor, but the mayor was studying the tablecloth. He looked at Lenora. Lenora marched to the stairs. She did not look afraid. She looked furious. She looked like a woman who was watching her net worth evaporate and blamed the person who lit the match, not the person who poured the gasoline. "This is disgusting!" Lenora shrieked. She grabbed the microphone stand, trying to wrestle it away from me. I stepped back, letting her have the podium. I didn't need it anymore. "This is a family matter," Lenora yelled into the mic. The feedback squealed, making people cover their ears. "This is a private dispute between a father and a troubled daughter. It has no place at a charity gala. You should all be ashamed of yourselves for listening to this filth." I stood next to her. I waited for her to stop screaming. Then I leaned in, my voice calm, cutting through her hysteria. "This is not a family argument, Lenora," I said. "It is governance." I looked out at the crowd. The money did not belong to the family. I said, "It belonged to the public. It belonged to the students who never got their scholarships. It belonged to the donors who thought they were building a legacy, not funding a lifestyle." I looked at Graham. "You wanted to rewrite my mother." I said, "You wanted to rewrite me. But you forgot one thing." "What?" Graham whispered. He was staring at me with pure hatred. "You forgot that you cannot rewrite the math." I said. I turned back to the audience. "I will not be signing the waiver tonight," I announced. Instead, my attorney, Sloan Mercer, has just filed an emergency injunction with the district court. As of 7:30 this evening, the assets of the Bell Foundation are frozen pending a federal audit. I stepped back from the microphone. I looked at Miles. He was looking at me. His face was a mask of tragedy, the relief of the secret being out, warring with the horror of what was coming. I nodded to him. It's over. The nod said, "You are free." Then I walked down the stairs. The path to the door was wide. No one tried to stop me. Photographers were swarming toward the stage now, their flashes popping like gunfire, capturing Graham Bell's disintegration in high definition. Donors were shouting at the board members. The hotel manager was frantically talking into a headset. I walked past Graham. He reached out a hand, as if to grab me, but then let it drop. He knew, if he touched me now, with everyone watching, it would be assault. He was powerless. I walked past Calvin. He gave me a small, grim nod. "Good job," the nod said. "Now run." I pushed open the double doors of the ballroom. The lobby was quiet. The air was cool. The muffled roar of the gala faded as the heavy doors swung shut behind me. I walked to the front entrance of the hotel. The valet was standing there, looking bored. He didn't know that inside, the most powerful man in town was being dismantled. I walked out into the night. The air smelled of rain and exhaust, a clean, city smell. I took a deep breath, my lungs filled with oxygen that felt, for the first time in 10 years, entirely my own. I pulled my phone from my clutch. I had a text from Sloan. "Injunction granted. The freeze is active. State police are on their way to secure the office." I typed a reply. "It is done." I looked up at the sky. It was a dark, moonless night. My mother was gone. I couldn't bring her back. I couldn't get back the years I had spent thinking I was worthless. I couldn't get back the acceptance letter to Columbia, but I had her name back. It was clean now. It was no longer a shield for a thief, and I had my name back. Anna Bell, not the failure, not the disappointment, the witness. I walked toward my rental car. I had a long drive back to Chicago. I had a job to do on Monday. I had a life to live, a life that was big and messy and real and entirely mine. I didn't look back at the hotel. I didn't need to. I knew exactly how that story ended. Thank you so much for listening to this story. It has been a journey walking in Anna's shoes as she took back her power from a system designed to keep her small. I hope you felt the tension, the anger, and the ultimate satisfaction of the truth coming to light. I would love to know where you are listening from today. Are you tuning in from the busy streets of New York, the quiet countryside of England, or somewhere else entirely? Please leave a comment down below and let me know. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more tales of justice, betrayal, and the long road to redemption, please make sure to subscribe to Revenge Stories. I have many more stories to tell, and I don't want you to miss a single one. And finally, I want to hear your thoughts. Did Graham get what he deserved? Was Anna right to destroy the foundation to save the legacy? Share your thoughts in the comments in English. I read every single one. Until next time, remember, the truth is the only thing that cannot be rewritten. Goodbye for now.